Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 14, Episode 142. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us here this Friday, Steelers Nation. Dave, the Pittsburgh Steelers wrapping up their third and final week of OTA, so we'll be back at the practice facility at the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex next week for their three-day mandatory minicamp. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then break for training camp. And speaking of which, we finally know the training camp dates. They just announced those on Friday morning. So we will be back out there at St. Vincent College and Latrobe this year at an earlier time for most of these practices.
Yeah, we're rolling right through this, getting closer by the day, obviously. And I think as of this morning, we have 93 days now until the Steelers play the Falcons in week 1. So we're almost to that 90-day mark. And as you mentioned, the training camp schedule release is out there. You're going to have to switch your requisitions from McChickens to McMuffins, I think. There are, I think I counted 10 of the practices this year will start at 10:30 a.m. And I think the first one open to the public is the 25th of July. And correct me if I'm wrong, they roll 10 right in a row. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 practices right in a row before
there's a 29th. There's no practice listed there.
No 29th. Okay. Yeah. Just goes to show you how the brain works sometimes, the way they roll together. 1, 2, 3, 4 together, and then a day off, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 together, it looks like, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. So typically that longest stretch is around 6 to 7 days. This year, 6. And yeah, a lot of earlier practices. I wonder why that is. Maybe to avoid, obviously, some of that Latrobe summer heat, although I think Tomlin has always been somebody to embrace that Latrobe heat and that 3 o'clock rain shower that seems to happen at least once every single year, but logistically maybe easier and better for the whole team to do it this way.
All right. So we'll see how the good news about that is on those days that are quote unquote supposed 10:30 starts, you should be back and have that daily diary written up probably a little bit earlier in the afternoon. And that can mean that we can do the special edition of the podcast a little bit early as well too. So I'm interested to see how this goes, but it will mean you probably having to leave your house at what time? About 7?
Not that early. I won't be one of the fans that has to be the first in line, but probably a little after 9 my time, I would say, to get there. Yeah.
All right. So we got that. We know the dates about that. Then obviously way before that, starting next week will be the 3-day mandatory minicamp, and doesn't look like or doesn't sound like anybody will miss that, does it?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, Cam Hayward committed to it, and I imagine everyone else will be there as well. Guys that have missed some time in OTA, George Pickens, I think he was there yesterday for the final day of OTAs. TJ Watt should be back from vacation. Yeah, just quickly on training camp, of course, we plan on being there for all 16 practices. The Friday Night Lights practice, the most well-known and exciting practice, will be Friday, August 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The weekend practices are still in the afternoon, most of them at 1:55 p.m., although Sunday, August 11th is at 2:55 for some reason. That practice a little bit later on in the day. The final practice will be Wednesday, August 14th at 10:30 a.m. I believe the way the NFL schedule mandates it, the first 4 days of camp will be non-padded as that ramp-up period, and then they'll have the day off on Monday and then return Tuesday, July 30th. That should be, based on how things have gone in the past, be the team's first day in pads. So you have your back on backers drill and full contact live tackling run sessions. So the 30th should be the day that training camp really feels like training camp.
All right, good to get that out of the way. And another exciting thing always about the Friday night lights practice is Pat Kerwin and Jim Miller from Sirius XM are usually there, so we get those slew of the interviews throughout that show and get to pass those along to the people as well too. So, all right, got those out of the way.
Let's stick with some news stories here that have come out since we last spoke on Wednesday, Dave. My favorite topic here, the Pittsburgh Steelers scouting department. I know that's not exactly headline news to many people, but it's something I'm always interested in, the moving and shaking of that unit, because it is so foundational to how this team builds out their rosters through the draft. And the scouts are the guys that are the first on scene to, begin to evaluate the prospects of tomorrow. Phil Kreidler, the longest tenured Pittsburgh Steelers in that building, retiring after 33 years, hired in 1992, the same year Bill Cowher became head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's how long ago Phil Kreidler began his Steelers career, mostly working on the college scouting side, was the college scouting coordinator for quite some time, had a senior title the last 2 years since Omar Khan was promoted to GM. Always saw him out at the Senior Bowl on the scouting trail, very recognizable face. And so a great career for Phil Kreidler, and wish him the best going forward.
Yeah, absolutely we do. And boy, you want to talk about someone that was easy to spot when we do the off-season pro day tracker. And boy, all the times we've scanned the photos and how he usually sticks out. Yeah, that's it's going to be a change there, but good on him. Long career doing thing that he probably loved to do.
And that's why this team likely hired Jim Knoll as a scout, area scout a couple weeks back. We kind of suspected at the time, could Kreidler potentially be stepping down? Kreidler, I don't know if he had an actual area. He wasn't always an area scout. He was a coordinator, kind of overseeing that whole department. But he was covering the Northeast in part this year. I know he was at, I think, UConn and maybe another school, Boston College. I can't quite remember. And they've lost Dave Pettit, who covered some of that territory. So Knoll should really be a dedicated Northeast scout they haven't had in a couple seasons. I got to talk to Phil Kreidler once. One of my highlights at the Senior Bowl is after the Senior Bowl in the Mobile airport, waiting for your plane because everyone flies out typically that Friday. And I did see Phil. I must have been in 2020, I think it was. And I mustered up the courage to talk to Phil Kreidler. Really good guy. I was very grateful with his time and insight, just a short conversation. But that's my one interaction with Phil Kreidler.
He didn't tell us to stop stalking him. And I evidently there was no restraining order involved, right?
No, they did not call airport security on me. He probably was wondering, how does this guy even know who I am? Right. But maybe, I'm not guessing many people had come up and said, "Oh my God, are you Phil Kreidler?" and just losing your mind over it before. But I was that guy. And we had a good conversation.
Good on you.
All right, Dave, where to here? Pittsburgh, like we mentioned, wrapping up OTAs. The story Wednesday was the Pittsburgh Steelers signing Cam Sutton. And then later that day, Cam Sutton spoke to the media. I guess kudos to him for at least speaking to the media and not, ducking them and meeting them, knowing that everything that has happened to him the last couple months, from the arrest warrant to the battery charges to getting released and then getting signed by Pittsburgh. What's your takeaway from what Cam Sutton had to say with the media and the general interaction between both sides?
I think some of the phrasing could have been better, right?
Yeah, personally, I know this is so, controversial, just the whole situation. And some people are really happy that Sutton's back in Pittsburgh from the football aspect and what he provides. And then obviously there is the domestic violence situation, the legal, I shouldn't say legal uncertainty, but the NFL uncertainty with the potential suspension. Personally, Dave, I did not like what he had to say. And I know he, has to be maybe a bit careful with how he explains things and what he says, because there still is the legal situation. It's not concluded, but the way that he made it out to make it sound like this is adversity and people are trying to dim his light for a guy that, if the allegations are true, and I don't know if this pretrial diversion program is really admission of guilt, but he's, to my knowledge, not really denied any of the allegations against him. He's just tried to, hope that it can kind of go away quietly. For him to frame things as this is my adversity and I'll overcome, it doesn't sound like a man that's taking responsibility or, believing that this isn't a problem of his own making.
Yeah, once again, I think the words that he chose and the actual phrasing wasn't great. And look, what did we say the other day before when he had signed, saying that man, this is a guy that likes to talk. He's hard to transcribe. Mm-hmm. He uses a lot of words when he answers questions. I think that's the best way to describe what it's been like, covering his media sessions in the past. So I'm not surprised that he got a little winded in a few of these answers the other day here. There is a point, though, I think, he comes right out with the opening statement in so many words. It says, I can't talk about it. And then he talks a little, he didn't talk about the actual incident, obviously, or the legalities, but the way he talked about he did sort of talk about it as far as being an adversity of his and all like that. I wish for him that he would have kept it more to football or mainly to football. So look, I can't, answer. I'm excited to be back out here, be with my teammates. I'm ready to try to move forward past this, see how I can fit in here. But when you start using the phrasing about not letting someone else dim your light, what else did he say? Grateful to be part of and just continue to ride that wave on the end and just keep living my life out. And, a couple other things, phrasing that he had in a few of the responses there are easy to flip around and take out either out of the context he intended them or in whatever context fits a certain narrative, if that makes sense. So, A, I'm glad he's got it out of the way now. B, I don't think the phrasing was great in a few of his responses. And C, if I'm him, I just walk past the media for the foreseeable future until a lot more comes out and, some of this is able to be maybe put behind him a little bit more.
These are always, I think, to a degree, difficult conversations and analysis for us to make because there is still a lot of variables that we don't know. We don't know exactly what happened that night. We don't know exactly what the legal outcome is going to be, those types of things. And there's certainly a valid and lengthy conversation we could have with listeners and you and I about second chances. And I'm a general believer in second chances. I'm not sitting here and saying that Cam Sutton should never be allowed to have a second chance or anything like that. Just generally speaking, I think those second chances come when there's been some sort of responsibility taken and atonement and some sort of remorse for his actions in some sense of it all. I mean, I'm not really expecting Cam Sutton to admit total guilt, yes, on Wednesday, and knowing the legal stuff is still going on and he's got to be careful with what exactly he says and all that kind of stuff. But just, again, the way it's framed to sit there and say, quote, holding my head high, everybody goes through adversity. Everybody goes through things in their life that changes in both directions. So it's all about how you stand on that and where you go from that. And some of that is true, how you respond and hopefully become a better person and man and, learn lessons. That is all important. But just to hear phrases like everybody goes through adversity. I think Mike Florio said it well. It sounds like he's the victim here. And to the best of our knowledge, and Sutton's never denied, to my knowledge, these allegations, he was, he's at least alleged and accused of doing a terrible thing of choking his girlfriend and a mother of his children and hitting her and then fleeing police, obviously, for 3 weeks before turning himself in and getting arrested. And to sit there and play the, don't dim my light and this is all adversity, it just doesn't really comport with what is at least alleged to have happened.
Yeah. Look, there's a section of the fan base, predictably, that not very happy with the Steelers, bringing Cam Sutton back at this point. That certainly is understandable. This is a very serious situation, nature. That obviously he is trying to get through on the backside. We'll see how the legalities and what the league thinks about this and all. Before we get into the did the Steelers make a mistake here? All what we said the other day. I only have to believe that the Steelers have done a lot of homework prior to this, at least researching legalities, what the league thinks, what may or may not have happened, how they think this will play out. And as we mentioned a few times as well, too, the court of public opinion is going to be the court of public opinion, and whatever happens with him moving forward is probably not going to change a lot of people's minds either way when it comes to that. I just wish once again, I'll leave it at this. I mean, hey, I don't know. Obviously I wasn't there. Don't know what happened. I just wish he would have handled. I'm glad he got the first media session out of the way, because that was going to hang over him until he did. But I just wish that he would have. If he's going to come out and say I can't really talk about it, then I would just keep it all to football as best as you could at that point. And once again, like we said, this is a man that likes to talk quite a bit. He uses a lot of words, and I think that ended up not playing in his favor the way he tried to articulate a few of his responses that he did have to some questions. I don't think it came out. Maybe sometimes, look, I say a lot of things that come out of my mouth that not as I intended, and I'm guilty as that as much as most people here. I just think that the way he tries to articulate things and the amount of words that he likes to use and likes to get wordy in his responses, I think that left a lot of his responses open to criticism, if that makes sense.
Sure. There's no trying to talk your way out of what he's been accused of. And if you read the affidavit and how just terrible it is, this should not be phrased as an adversity story and the narrative and the haters and the doubters and all that kind of stuff. That's not the situation that Sutton has seemingly put himself into. But that's my take. I know some people will disagree, and some people will, I'm sure, be angry, and we'll get some angry emails and comments about all that. But that's my stance. I really did not like what Cam Sutton had to say, and just really very much rubbed me the wrong way in the way that he framed everything that's happening around him. From the NFL standpoint, will he be suspended? An open question. The NFL has broad discretion. They've not made any comment I'm aware of since Sutton signed with Pittsburgh about his status. Again, sometimes they do let the legal situation play out before they weigh in, but they can basically do whatever they want. And they've certainly cracked down on domestic violence allegations and incidents in recent years, really, post them just totally botching the Ray Rice situation. So I would not be surprised. And as we see there today, I'm expecting a suspension of some length at some point for Cam Sutton. I don't know if that'll happen, but that's my read of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we'll have to watch how it plays out here. But, my first thought is probably could be as lengthy as maybe 6 games. Will it be something like 4 and then he appeals and it gets rolled back to 3? Who knows? But at the root of it, I will be surprised if he isn't forced to miss at least a couple of games, I think, here. So we'll just have to watch it play out from here on out. It will be interesting, now that Cam Sutton's got his initial press conference out of the way, and it doesn't sound or look like Mike Tomlin met the media after the final OTA practice on Thursday, but he does usually wrap up, correct me if I'm wrong, mandatory mini camp practices every year with a press conference, and that's usually the old press conference where he says, well, I told these guys they better stay in shape, kind of comments and all like that. I would expect him to be asked about, the return of Cam Sutton there. But yeah, I keep going back to just thinking that the team's probably done their due diligence and looking at this and how it would be viewed by the public. Is this some people will phrase this, the Steelers don't really care, it's just win at all cost. No matter what the player, if they think they can get the player on cheap, no matter what he's done, it's a win at all costs kind of signing. I would like to think, once again, that they did their homework on this to some degree and obviously know what the pushback from not only the general public, but the fan base and the NFL fan base will be, and then kind of go from there. And maybe more will come out about this, about the actual case and all like that. I don't know, but I mean, they've signed him. It's over, as far as that goes. And we'll have to just now wait and see how it plays out as far as what the league thinks about it and any legal repercussions as well.
Sure. And I'm, again, betting that had they not known and rostered Cam Sutton for 6 years and drafted him and knew him as well as any team in the NFL, had this been a non-former Steeler that did what Sutton's accused of, had been released on the run, there's no chance Pittsburgh would have signed him. I think it comes back to their relationship, prior to him leaving ahead of the 2023 season for Detroit with Cam Sutton, as giving them whatever comfort they were seeking to sign Sutton. But it certainly comes with blowback and pushback, and rightfully so, for all that Sutton is accused of, which again is very serious and very difficult to read and pretty disgusting overall. Again, it's not, we weren't there, we can't sit there and see the exact facts of the case. It's seemingly avoiding a trial, and the felony was dropped to a misdemeanor. And if he goes through this diversion program, then I guess his record is basically wiped clean. And that's the way that this thing is played out. But there is going to be blowback when teams do this, and Pittsburgh is no exception to that.
Right. Now, from this point forward, I mean, I'm done kind of talking about, until obviously he talks again or Mike Tomlin talks about it. I mean, I think we've, if we didn't address the comments that he made the other day, then we wouldn't be doing our job, I don't think.
Sure. No, I wanted to, for sure, because I had a big problem with it, and people will take his comments in different ways, and some people may disagree, but I wanted to give my take on what he said.
All right. And here come the bad emails, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, Dave, let's switch now to the Pittsburgh Steelers rookie class. One unsigned rookie to go. That is second-round pick Zach Frazier. And based on the tea leaves and what is happening around him, as you've been keeping track of, your assumption is Frazier is going to be signed, sealed, delivered pretty soon. So explain why you think that is.
Yeah, I'm really going out on a limb on that one, aren't I? Just as I was when there were two draft picks remaining, predicting that Zach Frazier would be the final one to ultimately sign. I had fun with Dave Weekly saying during my weekly interview with him on the radio that sometimes the clock's right twice, broken clocks right twice a day, right? But I mean, I think you could see this coming with him because of where his draft slot is. It's something that I've started to look at every year after players are drafted, where that line in the sand is for some of these guys when it comes to some of the guarantees and all like that. So generally, I think it was easy to see this coming with him. And as you said, I've been kind of monitoring who all has been signed in that second round group of players, which he seems to be almost right in the middle of. Now, on Thursday, the Jaguars signed Mason Smith. And the Colts signed Adonai Mitchell. And Smith was selected 48th overall by the Jaguars, while Mitchell was selected 52nd overall. And that was one spot after Frazier was selected 51st overall by the Steelers there. So he's boxed in completely on the underneath side, and a couple of spots ahead of him, he's boxed in by Mason Smith. Now, Aaron Wilson of KPRC, I think TV in Houston, put out some numbers of the Adonai Mitchell contract. I think he's got a year mixed up in here. It doesn't make in totality, his tweet makes sense. It's just not. I think he had a typo between 2026 and 2025. I'm sorry, in 2000, he has a typo, I think, as far as the base salary for 2026 in his tweet. But I broke it down, and my takeaway, at least from the trying to read in between the lines on the numbers that Aaron Wilson has, it sounds like a total of 65.22% of Mitchell's 4-year rookie contract is guaranteed in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not fully guaranteed, but because he does mention skill, injury, salary cap as part of some of those guarantees. But more specifically, I think if you look at some of the breakdowns in there, it sounds like, and I use that delicately until we actually see the numbers, 47.7% of his year 3 money of his rookie contract appears to be guaranteed in some form or fashion there. And that kind of would make sense on a couple of guys that are a little bit lower that have received some guarantees. Long story short, I think by the time mandatory minicamp ends next week, and it might even be the first day of mandatory minicamp, it might even be an hour after this podcast ends, you're going to see Frazier sign his rookie contract. And once again, the only reason this is a story at all is because we're interested in the year 3 guarantees. Obviously, with the new CBA, these things are all slotted. We know the generality of what the player is going to earn on the 4-year deal, what the signing bonus is going to be. But the only holdup, the only reason seemingly as to why there's a holdup and why, what makes this a news story is the 3rd-year money, and it's primarily because of nerds like me. So I expect him to come to terms and finally sign his deal by sometime next week.
Yeah, I know it gets in the weeds, but it's still valuable information just for us to track it. And the way that I nerd out about the scouting department, you nerd out about the contract movements and minutia of it all. So I think it's always interesting just to kind of follow this track as players get a little bit more each and every year as that line shifts, down the line a little bit year over year. I'm just kind of going to go down our traditional rabbit holes here, but at what point do you think, putting rookies aside, just talking about more veteran free agent contracts in terms of fully guaranteed, that fight has been ongoing, and occasionally a player gets that type of deal, Kirk Cousins, Deshaun Watson. What do you think the biggest obstacle is to these vets getting fully guaranteed contracts like all the other sports?
I mean, the owner's pushing back, obviously, on this. It's going to have to be something that's got to be negotiated through the CBA. It's going to take at the very least, I think the next step of what the NFLPA probably needs to push for is, look, I don't think I'm going to live long enough to, maybe I'll live long enough to see NFLPA finally get and push through fully guaranteed contracts on any contract that a player signs. It's hard to go from where they're at right now to that point, though. especially with all, how long they set the length of these CBAs and all like that. I think their next course of action, the more I've learned about this over the years, I come out of every CBA negotiation thinking, man, they didn't push hard enough, man. They didn't push hard enough. They talk a good game. A lot of the veterans that already had the money in the bank talk a good game to the younger players. But the fact of the matter is you constantly have more players in the league with less than 4 years of experience that don't have the big paydays than you do of the players with the big money contracts. It's easy for the J.J. Watts and of the world to say, you guys need to hold your ground. You guys need to save your money. You guys need to be prepared to lose a whole season to fight for your rights and do it for future players. But when it comes down to it, these players need paycheck. The larger group of players need the paychecks, right? So
yeah,
that's why they tend to sign off, as a group, as a union, a lot quicker on these things than they should. But personally, I think that their next step should try to be at least the first 3 years of any contract. If a contract's, even if a contract's 5 years in length or something along those lines, universally, we want up to the first 3 years of any deal signed by a player fully guaranteed.
Sure, I agree. And just to jump in really quickly, I would even say that, the young guys in those situations in the lockouts, they're looking to get paid because they've not been paid much. But there's a ton of veteran guys that have been paid that either aren't making the $20 million per year or just aren't handling their money well, which is a common thing. We know so many athletes go broke over their life, and they're needing money too. And that was a big reason in 2011 why I think the players kind of caved, because the guys were broke and they needed money and they needed to get a deal done to get football going again.
I think players should also, and this is something we talked on before, they need to try their best to get rid of all kind of tags, franchise tags, whatever tags. And they probably need to think about, for the younger players, need to push once again, it's a hard ask. And in some respects, I'm talking out of my ass, if you will, because I don't know all the minutia that goes into all of that in the negotiation and all like that. But I think the players should also push for, instead of being 4 years before you become, an unrestricted free agent, maybe that number should be 3. That should be the first line, and eventually just try to get that line in the sand pushed down. Now, obviously, the owners who hold the money, hold the big bags, are going to push back against that, but it's going to be a slow give and take. And on top of it, the owners are always trying to push for more games, right? Because they want more money, they want more TV coverage. So and that's good. This part of the non-game being played on the field is going to be things that stuff like our listeners have no what to talk about. It does not make for exciting podcast.
Sure, but it's important. It's vital to how the football gets shaped. And I think the owners are able to wait out the players longer. And I know the last CBA negotiation, the NFLPA, they were holding the Madden money to kind of help mitigate the issues of the lockout before. But the owners typically seem to have the ability to be more patient than the player side.
And look, you want to boil down to a simple push and ask for the young players overall. They should push for rookie contracts to be fully guaranteed. And then that stops all this, stuff us talking about Zach Frazier and third-year guarantees and all like that. If even undrafted rookie players on their 3-year deals had fully guaranteed deals, I mean, you're talking about, because let's face it, a lot of these guys don't even see that first paycheck, right? Because they don't make the team or for whatever reason. But in totality, if you look at now a 3-year undrafted rookie contract, those are over $1 million now, right? Well over $1 million. That can change that kid's life overall, sure. At its core. So if you want to boil it down of what really the next big push should be by the NFLPA in the negotiations, it should be for those young players, and it should be that all rookie contracts 3 or 4 years are fully guaranteed. That would be a good initial step, I think, for the NFLPA.
Although I wonder, I don't disagree, but I wonder would the vets say, hey, why are we so focused on the rookies? Their contracts are already kind of given a lot of slotting, and you don't have to really fight for the actual contract in terms of what it's worth. Why are we so focused on the rookies and not focused on the veterans, making sure they're getting more guaranteed and fully guaranteed money?
Well, the veterans, they talk out of both sides of their mouth, though, too, right? When they are that guy, they seem to forget that they were that kid once, But once they make it over the hump, yeah, I mean, it's easy for them to sit back and say, you guys need to save your money. We need to strike. We need to put it to the owners. We need to, they need to know that we're serious about costing them a season, those kind of things. But it's easy to say that when you have the money in a bank, Mm-hmm. And as part of that, then yeah, the veterans should push for, well, any new contract that we sign, we want the first 3 years fully guaranteed. So yeah, there's both groups of players that should be pushing for something, and the veterans also, or they should be trying to push to get these tags eliminated as well too.
Yeah, and there's also things like revenue sharing, which is always a hot button topic of how that revenue gets split, which helps push more just general money, even if it's non-guaranteed, to the players. Does this have to be a thing that must be codified though? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows, you and I at least, but in baseball, does their CBA have written that these contracts are guaranteed, or was it just one of those things that became the model over time where these contracts are just guaranteed and eventually just become socially accepted? That's how these contracts work. I
don't know enough about the other leagues when it comes to that, Alex. I look at that NHL. I'm constantly trying to learn how the NHL does things, just because that's my second favorite sport at this point. And I can talk days about the NFL CBA and the salary cap, but I can only talk 2 minutes about what goes on in other leagues. So I'm not going to talk about something that I don't know a lot about.
Okay. I'm just curious to wonder what their setup is, because you certainly can fight for that, to put that into actual language, but I'm just saying, I don't think you have to, because certainly you've seen some level of, more and more players getting fully guaranteed, or at least the guarantees increasing, whether you talk about the rookies and how again that line has changed, or the couple of high priced free agents. Why didn't all quarterbacks get fully guaranteed contracts after the Browns fully guaranteed Deshaun Watson's deal? That surprised me. I thought that was going to be and I know the situation was crazy for all kinds of stuff, and the Browns got a lot of pushback for doing that, but I thought that'd be the dam breaking, and the next quarterbacks would fall in line and demand fully guaranteed contracts. And that did not happen. I wonder why.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to that either there, but I do think though that pushing for all rookies to have fully guaranteed deals for here's another thing they can push for too. What's the league wide rule now? 90% of the cap should be paid to the players in cash over a 3-year period. They need to get that to 100%.
Yeah, or at least keep bumping it up to 95 or moving that line somewhat,
because that forces owners to push more money back into the players. And oftentimes you see teams around the league, because of the cash rules just the way they are in place now, spend some money on some players that becomes kind of questionable, And look, I mean, you got the Steelers in a situation now where you're kind of wondering where they are going to spend some of this cash on their own players. And at some point, they're going to have to spend the cash on either their own players or on outside and free agency and all like that to meet some of these thresholds. And I think by slowly bumping up that 90%, closer you get to 100%, you can create more spending that normally wouldn't be done because of teams having to spend the money.
Sure. Yeah, and that's something else they have to continue to fight for. And we know that Pittsburgh will, if they're not going to spend it this year, they're going to spend a bunch of money next year. They almost have to.
All right, we have talked about Cam Sutton's comments and CBA. I'm sure people are pulling their hair up. People probably turn the podcast off by now. So let's go in a more football direction, I think.
You wanted to talk about, Dave, Sports Info Solutions and their win models and projections that have come in pretty harshly on Pittsburgh. One of the probably lower projections we've seen so far, 7.4 wins they're projecting this year. Let's just round that to 7 and call that a 7-10 season. Obviously, not something people expect and certainly hope for, but that is the analytical model.
Right. It's a new model to look at, and it's Sports Info Solutions. If people are not familiar, they're absolutely fantastic with their data and stat and charting aggregation. We use them. We pull a lot of their data. Clayton, our own Clayton Eckert, has almost stories every night or every other night pulled with some sort of data from either Pro Football Focus or Sports Info Solutions. They're very good at what they do. Well, they have a new model with their win total analysis. I don't want to get so much into the actual model because models are models and we can sit there and dissect those all day. I just wanted to look at the big picture here of why do you think sites like DraftKings, why do you think kind of globally this offseason in particular, why it's hard to find any model projection with the Steelers with, let's say, more than 8.5 wins on the season?
Didn't this happen last year, though?
It seems to happen almost every season where I mean, I'm trying to remember when the last time the Steelers had a projected win total of like 9.5 or 10 or something like that.
What did they have in 21, going into 21, coming off the 2020 season where they started 11-0? I know they kind of, collapsed down the stretch, but I'm betting they had at least a 9-win projection going into 21.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'll have to look that up and all. But all I wanted to do in talking about this is, why do you suppose this year's team, the way it sits now, especially when you look at, DraftKings, I think that their last one was 8.5 wins, and the new SIS model is even less forgiving at 7.4 wins. Why at its core do you? I mean, there are people probably saying hammer that 7. I mean, I know at least where I am right now. I'm thinking, looking at this team, which I view as being one wide receiver short, to be quite honest with you. But even I'm thinking, man, they should be able to crush that 7.4 wins,
And I think DraftKings initially came in at like 7.5 too, and then they had to bump that up because everyone was just easily taking the over on that, and that put them at 8.5 right now. Yeah, why that is, I think it's largely the schedule. Obviously, these analytics will look at strength of schedule and opponents probably weighted pretty heavily. The difficulty of the AFC North, commonly viewed as the toughest division in football, and if you're going to put higher projections on, I'm assuming Baltimore and Cincinnati have some, above winning record type projections, and maybe Cleveland as well, then somebody has to be a little bit lower on that end typically. And Pittsburgh just gets that short straw.
All right. Let's take this opportunity to kind of just throw it to the listeners. Send us an email, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. Why do you think, these win total projections seem to be hovering between 8.5 to, let's say, 7.5 wins for the Steelers in 2024. Why do you listeners think this might be the case? What's the overarching maybe reason behind it? So we'll leave it at that, because once again, it's not a very interesting subject probably at its core.
Yeah, but notable for fans that at least want the chip on their shoulder. And I checked just one random DraftKings article in April of 2021 before the draft, but Pittsburgh was sitting at 8.5 wins at that point too. So I don't know the last time Pittsburgh was kind of universally thought to be in that 9-10 win camp, maybe going into 2019. Maybe I don't know for sure, but it does feel like every single year Pittsburgh is right around from the odds makers in that 8.5 win column.
All right. I just mentioned the wide receivers there, and got a little bit of stuff to kind of pass along. We kind of wondered whether or not Courtland Sutton would show up at the Denver Broncos mandatory mini camp. He said yesterday in an interview that on DNVR Broncos podcast that he's planning on showing up at mandatory mini camp next week. He did not I'll tell you this about that Sutton. That's another Sutton, or this Courtland Sutton. This Sutton gives great interviews. I thought he was great in that interview. They're a great interviewee, if you will. He plans on being at Denver Broncos mandatory minicamp. I did not. Now, he did have glowing things to say about Russell Wilson during that interview. Thinks Russell Wilson gets a bad rap. You can tell that he's a big Russell Wilson fan. I think we kind of knew that already going into this, so not a huge shock there. But I did not get a sense anytime during that interview that this is a guy that thinks he's going to be traded at any point this offseason.
No, I mean, he said all the right things, and I didn't get that sense either, but does that mean he's guaranteed to stay? If Denver does not want to give him what he wants contractually, will there eventually be a point where they have to decide what his future is? I guess it's still what it comes down to.
Right. I mean, these could be things above and beyond his control, right?
Yeah, I mean, it partially is. He's under contract. He wants more, but Denver has no obligation to give him more, and so they'll have to do this dance. And yeah, he's going to be there for minicamp, which makes sense. Does not want to need to get fined hundreds of thousands of dollars, which the Broncos would have that right to do. So
$100,000, basically.
Is it 100,000? Okay, well, still, no matter what it is, 6 figures is not something you want to be taken out of your wallet there. So, probably the right decision for him to show up, and what happens from there, we'll have to wait and see.
All right, no sense going down his route. We've covered his situation a ton, but it was notable that we kind of wonder whether or not he'd show up mandatory minicamp. The other kind of interesting part that I want to talk about there is Joel Corey came out, a great article on the impact of the new contract signed by Justin Jefferson and what it potentially does to the wide receiver market at this point. Within that, he covered the Brandon Ayuk situation, and he could definitely see Brandon Ayuk asking for and receiving a contract in the $30 million right at, I think he kind of left it kind of openly that would kind of be the high side for Brandon Ayuk, $30 million per year new money average, which I don't think he'd get a lot of pushback from a lot of people overall, but I do think he kind of set the floor on him at, what was it, like 28.75 million, something around in that neighborhood, which also is believable when it comes to that. As I was writing that up, and Joe Corey also kind of highlighted in that article that, and it seems to be a growing sentiment. I think you talked about it the other day. At some point with all these contracts that the 49ers are giving out, it seems like something's got to give somewhere, and probably particularly at the wide receiver position, and particularly probably when it comes down to either Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel. In other words, at some point, maybe by the start at the latest of 2025 season, that one of those guys is probably going to have to go. Now, if they sign Courtland Sutton to a brand new deal this offseason here,
Courtland
whatever.
Sutton?
I mean, not Cortland Sutton. Brandon Ayuk. If they sign Brandon Ayuk at some point between now and the start of the 2024 regular season, he's not going anywhere. At least not by the start of 2025 season. Right. There. As I was writing about Ayuk's contract and Joel Corey's thoughts on it and all like that, I did kind of wonder, because Michael Silver, I think, who covers the 49ers, the beat writer out in California as well too, in so many words said, by the start of, and even really, I think particularly by the trade deadline this year, that you could see the 49ers try to move one of those guys. Here's something that I thought about. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think it's just part of, and I don't think we've kind of covered this part of it in our discussions about it. It wouldn't make sense at this point in time while you're trying to sign Brandon Ayuk to trade away Deebo Samuel, right?
Not until you've signed Ayuk officially, no.
Right. So what's per se should they get Ayuk under contract here in the next couple of weeks? Would that tend to make Deebo Samuel the more likely candidate to be dealt at that point between now and week 1 of the 2024 season?
No, I think it of course means that if a Niners receiver gets dealt, it will be Deebo Samuel. As you said, as I said on Wednesday's show, you're not going to sign Ayuk and then turn around and trade him, now or next year. I said, yeah, you got to make that choice between one of those two guys. And I said, you won't have both on your roster by the time the draft rolls around next year. So yeah, then Samuel becomes that guy that becomes, if you're trading anybody, you're trading Deebo Samuel.
Does it feel like plausibility wise, if they were to move any of them, even with Ayuk still not inked? Look, people should know how I feel about the Ayuk situation at this point. I think it'd be an absolutely fantastic ad for the Steelers, but I think that what people lose sight of the most is not the Steelers actually potentially trading for him. It's them giving him that contract after the fact. I've made that clear several times throughout the offseason. The big news would not be, in my opinion, the Steelers actually trading for Ayuk. It would be that they make him the highest paid player on their roster after doing so. That would be a precedent that would really need it would be big news, at least in where I sit here. So even so, and long story short, I'll be absolutely shocked if they traded for Ayuk and then turn around and gave him that big contract. I think my takeaway at this point, I don't think anything's going to happen at this point. I'm resigned to the fact that they're not going to trade for one of Sutton, Ayuk, or Deebo Samuel at this point. But if they were to trade for one of those 49er wide receivers at this point, especially on the heels of Jennings getting his deal done with them, it appears to me that Deebo Samuel might end up being the guy that gets dealt.
Unless they can't get a deal done with Ayuk. And to hear TJ Hushmanzada, who was on a 49ers radio show yesterday, and Hushmanzada is, I guess, a personal coach, is working and helping train Ayuk, especially if he's away from the team right now. He says that Ayuk thought about 6 weeks ago a deal with San Fran was going to get done, and then it of course did not. And he's now, in Hushmanzada's words, Ayuk is pessimistic about being able to re-sign with San Francisco. And he says that Hushmanzada says that Ayuk would take a deal like St. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown in Detroit, which was $30 million per year, and basically implying the Niners are not offering that kind of contract. And if they did, Ayuk would sign it immediately. So that seems to be the number he's at least shooting for, and a number the 49ers have, in Hushmanzada's eyes, not broached.
Okay. Well, once again, he wants to get paid, and they're probably not going to see him until he does get paid, or they're going to end up having to trade him.
Yeah, those are the options. If you do re-sign Ayuk, then you trade Deebo. Would you trade Deebo before the year begins if you sign Ayuk long-term? That's a tough sell for a team trying to make a Super Bowl run.
I think with them, at the very least, if they got Ayuk done here in the next however many weeks, I don't think you do, unless somebody blows your socks off with an offer. I think you try to hold on to Debo as for most of the summer, because obviously injuries can happen and all like that. So if Debo was to get dealt after they sign, if they did sign Ayuk, I would tend to think that we would see it more later in the summer, as opposed to, all right, we have Ayuk under contract, let's trade him. But once again, the quality of the offer out there could easily change the timing of it.
But why trade Samuel at all before the year begins? Because you're not going to need the cap space. If anything, an Ayuk extension might either keep his current cap charge the same or lower it potentially a little bit.
Sure, Ayuk's not. If they re-sign Ayuk, you would have to think that his cap number is coming down from that $14 million,
right?
And so they just saved cap space with the Jennings deal a little bit as well too. They're past June 1st, so they got the finally that came off of, who was the defensive player that they had the June 1st.
Armstead?
Might have been Armstead, yeah. So in fact, if you look at the NFLPA numbers right now as they sit, and I don't know what they have as far as outstanding things that need to be filed, they're being shown at 14.5 million under right now as it is. So, and that's post June 1st.
Right. So yeah, I just don't know what the compelling. I think next year you trade Samuel either before free agency or right around draft time, and that makes sense. I don't know if trading him before this year begins makes sense, even if you get that deal done with Ayuk.
Right. And then, as Michael Silver tweeted the other day, maybe a more realistic situation when it comes to, and once again, this assumes they get Ayuk under contract, is if any one of those guys go, it might be Samuel, and it might be right before the trade deadline if things collapse and the season doesn't go the way that they want it to go.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's his words, but why would they do that? I mean, are they really going to collapse by week 9? Maybe.
No, I'm saying if they did.
Sure.
I'm not saying they would. I mean,
no, I know.
I think everybody would at this point thinks the 49ers are going to be in this thing and easily in this thing. In other words, their worst case scenario would still probably not facilitate them dumping things right ahead of the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see that unless things have just gone completely out of sorts and they're just having a miserable season.
I think that was Silver's contention as well too.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
I just saw him say deadline. I didn't know if he said with that caveat.
Well, I mean, I think you were to interpret too that he's just not saying sell them off right before the deadline.
Okay. All right. Anyway, we'll keep you posted on that. I know it's been just endless speculation, but it's notable. So your stance is unlikely on acquiring any of those big 3 names: Ayuk, Samuel, and Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, even throw DK Metcalf in. I'm resigned. Okay. I'm resigned to this team to the 2024 Steelers probably standing pat. Now, if you want to, you want to throw a guy like Treylon Burke. Who else? One of the Houston wide receivers. I mean, I'm talking about move the needle type guys.
Mm-hmm. My question was going to be though. So does this team go add a receiver before week 1, even if it's a lesser caliber receiver?
I think you got to keep your options open to it, obviously. And if you think that you can improve your team by adding one of those, what I would kind of view as more project, if you feel that's the way you got to go and you can get it done cheaply, then why wouldn't you? But
are you expecting it? Because I'm still expecting them to add something, at least semi-notable at receiver, even if it becomes Burks or Alec Pierce or some other similar name.
I will only say this: history has told us that the teams that the Steelers break mandatory minicamp with, 9 times out of 10 are added to by at least 1 or 2 players that were not under contract with the team once mandatory minicamp broke. So take that for however you want to take it. There will be players and I think more than one added to this team post mandatory minicamp moving forward. And it's quite easy to circle the wide receiver position.
Are you comfortable with what Pittsburgh currently has at wide receiver?
I think I've made it clear I am not.
Right. I am not either. Now we have to watch these guys and we'll get evaluation on them in camp, but I think this team wants to add a receiver. They've been looking for a more notable name receiver throughout the offseason. And I think that pursuit will continue. And eventually they'll add somebody, even if it's not one of those top names we've been talking about all offseason.
I mean, they sure have been talking up, and these wide receivers sure have been talking up a good game, the Van Jeffersons and the Quez Watkins and the Calvin Austins. But, I got to see it,
Right. I still wonder if Courtland Sutton's going to be the guy. I mean, if they can't figure out contractually, get on the same page, that's going to be maybe the catalyst for a potential trade.
Well, I don't think you'd have to twist his arm to come to Pittsburgh based on the comments he made about Russell Wilson. I'll say that.
Right. He may be not exactly demanding a trade, and his interview yesterday didn't suggest he's trying to force his way out, but I don't think he'd think twice about getting the link back up with Russell Wilson and come out to Pittsburgh. And it still makes a lot of sense. It's cheaper because, again, if you trade for an Ayuk or Samuel or somebody like that, you're paying them a ton of money, and you're likely to pay George Pickens a ton of money next year too, on top of whatever you're paying the quarterback position next year, which will not be the bargain number that they have it on right now with Wilson and Fields. So all things to be considered.
All right. What about some other current Pittsburgh Steelers players who have said some things?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot there that stuck out to me. I'll kind of scroll back through.
Sounds like Justin Fields got a little bit more work with some players to close out the week.
Yeah, he says the team has done a good job of giving him some reps and rotating guys in, and he feels comfortable with the offense and is increasing that comfort, of course, but says the terminology is a little bit different, but the core concepts in the system is the same.
What do you think about Minkah Fitzpatrick ready to get back to playing Minkah ball? And what does that mean?
Means turnovers, means takeaways, means the splash plays that unfortunately weren't there a year ago. I was trying to find the last season Minkah Fitzpatrick did not record an interception. He's done it every year of his NFL career. He did it every year in college. You're going to have to go back to his high school days in New Jersey, and I'm guessing he had a bunch of picks back in those days as well. So I don't know the last time he went a year without a pick, but that's well overdue. And I'm sure Minkah is itching as anyone to get back out there and make that type of play.
Yeah, he definitely feels the put. And look, unfortunate injury last year cost him some games and all like that. But for this, one of the things that this 2024 team is going to need, if they're going to exceed those 7.4 and 8.5 win totals, is they're going to need takeaways from this defense. And Minkah is just the guy that can, if things go right for him, and he could have 6 of them,
Sure. Yeah. When he's on his game, and I think Pittsburgh has a better structure this year when you have a defined strong safety in Deshaun Elliott, who's your every down, all situations strong safety, presumably, as opposed to last year when you had this mixing and matching of base versus sub with Keanu Neal in base and KZ in sub, and that got kind of messy. They didn't, want to put KZ in the box because he's smaller, and Minkah had to play in the box more. And then you add Cam Sutton, and for whatever games he'll be available for, that's going to be able to rotate in your sub packages and let Sutton be able to play deep half safety and present some different looks and coverage rotations, which will be good for Minkah and for this defense. So those things are aligning, along with his health, of course, for Minkah to bounce back, and I'm confident he will. Speaking of, we started the show training camp. Joey Porter Jr. speaking yesterday about training camp, and you can't wait for that Porter versus Pickens battle again. It was so fun to watch last year. Pickens, of course, made that viral catch against Porter, but talk about that iron sharpen iron mentality. You'll get that with Porter and Pickens.
Yeah, it should be a fun training camp watching those two go at it based on what we already saw last year. Both these guys you expect to make jumps in their game overall, and two very important pieces of this 2024 team. So no wonder that he's excited. So that's something to look forward to there. Jaylen Warren was asked about his current situation and contract situation specifically. I understand why that was, because he obviously being a former undrafted free agent, he is not tied to the same rules as say still signed draft picks, meaning that he can negotiate a new deal with only 2 years in the book so far, whereas guys that were drafted have to wait that extra year and all. But within that, while I understand why he was asked about it, and he gave 100% the right answer. Says he's focused on a Super Bowl and not his contract situation. But at its core, and especially on the heels of Najee Harris not having his 5th-year option picked up, and unless Najee Harris gets an extension first, or is in the plans to get an extension at some point, maybe not necessarily first, but is in the plans to get an extension this offseason, I will be very shocked if Jaylen Warren gets himself an extension this offseason.
Me as well. I think next year will be the interesting situation to wade through with the running backs. What happens with Harris? Does he get extended? Does the team let him walk? Warren will be a restricted free agent, so you'll at least get a second-round tender on him. If Harris walks, though, would you consider a long-term deal with Warren? Obviously, depends partially on how this year goes, but next year will be the offseason to watch with the running backs and their contracts.
And they have a lot of leveraging advantage over him as well, too, because of the restricted free agent, even on if he was to know that he would potentially get a second-round restricted tender. It's easy to put a ceiling on that because of that, instead of yielding the franchise tag sword, like I always talk about during the offseason. Omar Khan would be able to use the ever so slightly smaller restricted tender sword there. So, yeah. Now, look, is there anything preventing this from happening? I think the best case scenario, if he were to potentially get a deal this offseason, talking about Jaylen Warren, it would be on the heels of Najee Harris getting a deal. But even so, there's going to be ceilings because of the potential tender that they could put on him next offseason. I think really at its core, the best scenario probably right now for Jaylen Warren is to have a fantastic 2024 season where he gets indeed a second round tender next offseason, and then maybe he can parlay that into some sort of deal next a year from now.
Yeah, maybe next summer or something like that. Do you think, and I know there's a whole year to go to come this time next year, but basically 2025, that the Steelers will have both Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren?
Less confident about Najee.
Sure. Yeah, Warren should be here, tender at the least, but Harris is the wild card.
Right. I mean, if they don't get a deal done with Najee between now and week 1 of the season, I really think you'll see Najee at the very least go into the tampering period unsigned.
It's difficult to see him return, assuming he enters week 1 as, a pending free agent. Not impossible, but it's difficult for me to envision a scenario in which Pittsburgh pays that if they were unwilling to pay the $6.79 million 5th-year option.
And we still haven't heard Najee talk this offseason, right?
Right. Have not heard him. I'm not sure if we will until training camp rolls around.
And maybe even and that showing up at training camp, if he does, and if that's the next time we hear from him, I don't imagine it's going to be a very long interview.
No, but we'll see. I don't know. I mean, he's certainly not someone who's jumping at the chance to speak with the media, which is fair and fine. Not criticizing him for it, but I would assume he'll talk to the media the minimal amount he has to.
All right, what'd you think about what Cordell Patterson had to say?
Yeah, I mean, nothing too crazy excited about the new kick return rules and thinks that's going to help him. And they're already trying to get a jump on adjusting to that in terms of his role offensively, willing to do whatever it takes and whatever the team asks him to do. So have to see a training camp exactly how he's being used, what kind of snaps he'll get. I wonder how much work he'll get in camp. He knows the offense. He's 33. Of course, he's going to practice and get some work, but what will be that split at running back and receiver? Want to see how the offense tries to use him in a couple different ways.
He's a very likable guy when he gives the interviews, that's for sure. And I liked him saying that he's been watching some of that spring league kickoff tape and all like that. And it sounds like he's pretty excited about the rule change.
Yeah, I think the statistically one of the greatest, if not the greatest kick returner of all time. Happy that this play is now a play again. To go back to Porter just really briefly, he talked about what he's looking to do in year 2. And there's a lot of things, obviously, but talked about wanting to improve his leadership and spoke about how young this cornerback room is besides Dante Jackson and then Cam Sutton just coming back. It's a really young group overall with Trice and Rush. And they did add Anthony Averett, who's more of a veteran, but Porter being the number 1 corner knows that guys are going to be watching him, and he has to grow up pretty quickly.
Look, he's not afraid to talk, right? With the last name Porter, so that plays into his favor of being a vocal leader on the team. So I could envision him indeed taking a next step, especially with the younger guys. Whatever younger guys are on that defense this year. So I think that's expected. Next step for him. Do I think he's going to be one of the unquestioned leaders on the defense? No. But once again, this is a guy that's not afraid to talk. And if he's that guy, and he's obviously got a year experience under his belt and obviously well aware of the culture and everything, I would expect him to be that next level of leadership on this team.
Yeah, and certainly
I think he'll be good at it too, to be honest with you.
Sure. And certainly won't be viewed as a team leader for the defense as a whole, but in that cornerback room, I mean, we'll see with Dante Jackson, but he's just getting here, obviously, and Cam Sutton, we'll see how if he's suspended, it's going to be hard to lead when you're, at home. But Porter in the role that he's in, as everyone's looking to him to be the guy, I think he understands the responsibility and weight that comes along with being the guy, which has a production and football aspect. You go out there and do your job and make plays, but be a leader in some form or fashion as well.
Right. And we'll see obviously what happens with Cameron Sutton, but you also have another guy there that's been around, that can help some in the leadership role as well.
Broderick Jones and Dan Moore, no bad blood between the two, despite them battling. And basically Broderick Jones saying that Mike Tomlin has reminded them there's a competition between these two men. So does that imply that Fautanu is going to be the right tackle and Jones and Moore will battle it out on the left side? And of course, you would expect Broderick Jones to be a starter this year. Probably reading too much into that, but those two guys, good friends, even though they're battling for spots and roles.
Yeah, I would just chalk that up to saying the right things.
Yeah, but I really like. I think Broderick Jones has really come across mature and just a really good dude overall and a really promising player.
Yeah, I think you're seeing him speak more.
Yeah, I think so. And guy that at Georgia, you're just kind of one of many elite players, and I'm sure other guys got fanfare too. And of course, in Pittsburgh, get other guys to look at and all the spotlight on Russell Wilson, but along that O-line, Jones could be that long-term fixture. And I think he's having that approach of, I got to be one of these leaders as well.
I think you're seeing Keanu Benton talk more as well, too. That was a very enjoyable interview he had with Missy Matthews on Steelers.com. I think he kind of is accepting the fact that a lot's going to be expected out of him in year 2, and especially from the leadership role.
There's certainly a theme here about young guys that are expected to have big roles in their second year when you draft a really good rookie class, as Pittsburgh did last year. These guys all expected to make that second year jump in a lot of ways, both on field and off field, and the way they approach things. I thought Cam Hayward made a really good point. We've talked about it before, Dave. That year 1 is such a gauntlet for any rookie. You go from your college season, your bowl game, to potential all-star game, Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, NFL, well, not NFL, PA Bowl, but whatever, all those bowl games, to combine, to obviously training for the combine, then combine itself, and then pre-draft visits, your pro day, to the actual draft, to rookie minicamp, to OTAs to mandatory minicamp to training camp to preseason, regular season, potentially playoffs. I mean, there's just no time to even like sit there and think. You were just go for an entire calendar year. You get into that first full off season after your first rookie season, you get some time to decompress and breathe and just kind of be able to plan out what your year looks like. You know, the team you're on, you know, the situation you're in. You're not new to the NFL. So that's why I think a lot of those guys make that second year jump, not only for just them physically and knowing the playbook and all those things, but just kind of getting to breathe for a second and get to evaluate their situation. I think it's really important for all those second year guys.
And I think they have a better understanding of what it takes and how to get their body ready for the season. I think Keanu talked a little bit about that, talked about getting advice from Eagles tackle Lane Johnson. A bunch of them were out there training in Hawaii together. So just a better understanding of the rigors that go into not only a season, but what's all involved in the off season to make sure you're ready for the long season. So look, if he they had that early not mandatory OTA clip of him just showing a lot of his athleticism, and that wasn't anything new at its core, but it was just exciting to see him move the way he moves. And if this is a guy, one of the biggest knocks on him, I think, coming out of Wisconsin was his ability to keep the balance and stay on his feet. He outside, and I think he did a good job of pushing that narrative aside really overall throughout his rookie season. Long story short, I mean, if this guy stays healthy and does make that next jump, we're going to be looking at a lot of impressive all 22 clips of him.
Yeah, I'm expecting a big year for Keanu Benton, and then Nick Herbig as well talked about that. I think the quote from the Post-Gazette was, I don't know if he's added weight, but kind of just changed his body composition some to, I think, get a little more muscular and a little better weight and more muscle. And so we'll see how he looks in year number 2. But it was funny whenever Benton was doing that interview with Missy Matthews. Missy had asked, have you hung out with Nick Herbig this offseason? I'm like, yeah, that's all they've done. The entire they just inseparable. It's fun to watch their friendship, obviously from Wisconsin. But I mean, every clip I saw of them on Instagram or social media, they were in Hawaii a lot, but they were just, if I saw Herbig, I saw Benton. And so those guys have worked very closely, and we'll see how those guys look and move in year number 2.
So in other words, when you report from training camp, there's going to be a lot of those two coming down the hill together, right?
Coming down the stairs together. That would make a lot of sense. So yeah, those guys seem like to be true best friends, and it's pretty cool for those guys to get to follow that into the NFL.
All right. Kind of the only other note I have here is Dan Graziano of ESPN the other day on Get Up said that looking deeper into Russell Wilson's contract, that he has a no trade clause in there. Not that it's a huge deal, but I mean, it's a pretty significant nugget.
Yeah. First of all, we got to get that Graziano access for you, Dave. Apparently he's looking at contracts. I mean, I don't know how you get that, but maybe someone just told him that. That is interesting for it being a 1-year minimum deal. It might be the first no trade clause in a 1-year minimum contract in NFL history. Obviously, you would not expect it to come into play, but I guess that was one little piece of protection that Wilson wanted to build in for himself, to give himself some, certainty of how this year is going to play out for him.
Right. And the way I take it is if they got to the point where they did think about trading him, he would have say on signing off on where he wants to go. In other words, you just can't send him to name a team where he probably wouldn't want to go. So that just protect at its core. This is not a big deal. At its core, it's not really notable. And at its core, it's just Russell Wilson protecting himself a little bit.
It's the you got to cut me if you want to get rid of me button. I think is why he put that in there, which Pittsburgh, if they got to that point, and hopefully it doesn't, but they'd be able to do given the low salary. Because I know Wilson, he was looking for an option year. Isn't that the story way back whenever he was visiting teams like the Giants in Pittsburgh? He was trying to kind of push for, I'll take 1 year for the minimum, but can you give me a second year with this option? And Pittsburgh said no. Maybe this was his other thing. Okay, if we're not going to do the option year, give me this no trade clause just to give me a little peace of mind going into this new year with this new team.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
One thing I want to mention too, and this is not, it's not about a current Steeler, it's about someone who potentially could have been a Steeler, and big credit to our Troy Montgomery for finding this story because it's kind of become a story the last 24 hours. But Washington Commanders safety Jeremy Chinn could have been Pittsburgh Steelers safety Jeremy Chinn. In an interview with Sirius Radio, Chinn had said that Pittsburgh had offered him more money and potentially a multi-year deal he could not remember. It would make sense because they gave Deshaun Elliott a 2-year deal right after Chinn signed with Washington. But Chinn was saying that turned down Pittsburgh, liked Washington, liked the scheme, praised Dan Quinn, praised their DBs coach over there. And I'm mad because I wanted to see Jeremy Chinn in Pittsburgh. That would have been, I think, a really good and fun fit.
Just looking at the contract that he signed with Washington at its core, it looks like he's got per game roster bonuses and workout bonuses in there, but the bulk of it, meaning the base salary, which was $1.125 million, and he also got looks like a signing bonus of 2.37. If you add those together, looks like his fully guaranteed money that he got, even though it's just a 1-year deal, is almost $3.5 million. All right. When you look at the deal that Elliott signed, it was 2 years and it totaled out at, what did it total out at? $6 million, $3 million per year. But the fully guaranteed money in that deal is just a signing bonus of $1.5 million.
Right. Now, we don't know, was that the same offer they gave Chinn? Did they offer him more? We don't know. But Chinn's words were that Pittsburgh had offered more than whatever Washington was offering.
All right. What date did Elliott sign on?
I can double check here. Someone had mentioned this. My understanding is Elliott did sign after, but I do want to double check. I just saw someone make that comment. March 15th, if Wikipedia is to be trusted, on when Elliott signed.
And when did Chinn sign?
March 14th.
Okay, so that would add up that they might have been after Chinn. Mm-hmm. And when he decided, I'm gonna. He probably had a deal on the table from Washington at the same time. It adds up, at least from a calendar, that he's telling no lies here, and it probably did come down to the guaranteed money. And I would imagine the Steelers probably offered him similar deal that they offered Elliott.
I guess, but I mean, again, Chinn is saying more, and Chinn is implying that he wanted to felt a better scheme fit in Washington with Dan Quinn. Take that for whatever it's worth, but that seemed to be Chinn's motivation, was a little less about the money and more about the fit.
I would imagine that if the money was greater on an average per year standpoint for Chinn, that the Steelers probably did want 2 years on that deal. Right. And that the guaranteed money, once again, was probably going to be lower than what he actually received from Washington.
Yeah, and Chinn was kind of hinting and thinking it was a multi-year deal, which I'm pretty confident it was. And maybe that was a factor as well. But that was a story. Chinn, that's his decision. We'll see how it works out. Elliott, I think, was a fine signing. It's a good role signing. I'm good with that. But if I had the choice between Jeremy Chinn and Sean Elliott, I would have taken Jeremy Chinn.
I would too.
And so would the team, apparently. But they pivoted, and that's all good. But that was the story to come out yesterday. Anything else here, Dave, to talk about before you start wrapping up today's show?
I think we got through most of it. Not probably as interesting a show today, but we covered a lot of topics, I think.
Yeah, we did. I know a little bit later on, maybe the here and now with Pittsburgh, with 3 weeks into OTAs, kind of covered all the main OTA storylines. And of course, an evaluation standpoint, that all will happen at training camp, starting now officially July 25th. So let's get through some reader emails and close out today's show.
Patrick Donovan writes in, so going back to Monday's podcast, in the article, Alex wrote about the kickoffs and kick returns and the possibility of offensive and defensive linemen playing these units. My question is, do you think it will affect the roster in any with your backup linemen possibly playing the return and kickoff units? He says there's another chance of injury there. So do you think there could be an extra lineman on the 53 and maybe go with 4 receivers? Could 4 tight ends be on the roster or something of that nature? Look, I think that the juxt of the question is how does the new kickoff rule maybe change the the complexion of the 53-man roster. Probably not much at its core. You talk about extra offensive linemen. You got to remember that this team's still probably going to have X amount of. You got to have an inactive list. Every week. I don't think it really. At least my early thoughts would be, I don't think this causes you maybe to keep one more extra offensive lineman than you would. I think you get more into the positional player aspect of it, meaning not, really just a better way to say it is non-offensive lineman or non. Now it because of the use of the defense line, and we've seen this team kind of bump up the number of defensive linemen that they keep, but even so, I think it's like 7 maybe on average now. Even so, one of those usually ends up being inactive anyway,
right?
Depending on health and all like that. At its core, you expect. I think we should go to the core of the question here: are you expecting the 53-man roster setting to change significantly because of the kickoff rule?
Short answer, no. And I hope you had at its core on your Depot bingo card today, because you're cashing in on that. I don't think it's going to change the actual construction in any big ways. The active and active roster may change, and who you carry could potentially change as well. So again, we'll just have to see. There's a lot of trial and error. And while kickoffs are going to be more prominent, even the guys that designed the change believe that touchbacks will happen 60% of the time. So I don't know if you're going to change your entire roster complexion or get a guy spot, especially a lineman, just because of kickoffs, the thing that still is going to be a small portion of the overall impact on a game and the course of the hundreds of plays that happen over the course of a game, 150 plus plays. But I think it could change just in terms of who gets out there and potentially who gets a hat and the usefulness of that athletic backup lineman who maybe gets an extra look because of what they could offer on, say, the kick return team.
All right. Chris Warren writes in, hey, guys, this one's titled Flippin' Florio. I try not to put a lot of stock into hot takes and subpar analysis we get out of many of our national sports writers, but Mike Florio struck a nerve with his comments about Cam Sutton. First, we don't know for sure what happened, he says. Secondly, you can be disgusted by the behavior if in fact it is true, he writes, without forever writing a guy off who had previously proven himself to be a generally good citizen and very smart player during a 6-year stint with the Steelers. Based on previous events, don't you think that we know enough about Coach Tomlin to ascertain that he generally cares about people and believes in helping people to find redemption when he can? He says, of course, Florio expected the Steelers to trade Tomlin last season and later suggested that Tomlin would be stepping down at the end of the season. Does this guy know anything at all about Coach T? Look, I mean, this is going to be a hot topic just because of Cam Sutton and the alleged crime and all like that. So there is going to be opinions, hot takes, or whatever all across the board when it comes to him. I think at its core, and I think Chris kind of hit on it here, I go back to thinking that I'd like to think that the Steelers really did their homework, on the whole entire situation when it comes to Cam Sutton. And second, I do subscribe to the fact that Mike Tomlin generally cares about people and helping them through whatever situations that players are going through. I think both those things can be true.
Yeah, that's kind of my takeaway. I think both can be true. And yeah, I mean, this thing has a lot of layers to it. And as the reader said, we don't know exactly what happened. We just know the affidavit. And again, to the best of my knowledge, and I know that Sutton talked about he's got to be careful with how he discusses still his ongoing legal situation. I'm not aware of him refuting what has been alleged against him so far. So again, you get into this whole thing. Yeah, should guys get second chances? And in many cases, yes. My personal standpoint is second chances can come when there's been some atonement and responsibility taken, and hopefully an eye towards, someone, genuinely wanting to not make those mistakes again. And hopefully Cam Sutton is in that camp, but I didn't get any sort of remorse or atonement or responsibility or anything even in that ballpark from his comments. As he said something separately and privately with Tomlin and Khan, and they've met with him a couple times. Potentially, that obviously could be the case, but I understand the pushback against Pittsburgh signing Cam Sutton. Had another team signed Cam Sutton, they would have gotten the same pushback, and I think it's fair to be able to critique that. This just happened. It's not something that happened years ago. That's well in a guy's past. It's not even a Mike Vick situation where he also did a terrible thing with a dogfighting, but he went to prison. He served his time, and then he came out of prison and was given the chance because he faced the punishment for it. That's even a different situation here. This just happened with Sutton, and so far there's been no real punishment from the NFL or even a real legal consequence so much yet. So again, a lot of layers to this thing. I personally, if an analyst like Florio, who I disagree with plenty, but wants to call out Pittsburgh for this, I understand it.
Talk radio, talk TV, podcasts, those all power things, and obviously have for a while now, more so than traditional newspapers used to do. If you don't like someone's take, don't listen to it. Turn it off. Same goes with us. If you get 20 minutes into a podcast and you don't like what we're talking about, by all means, turn it off. You also have the prerogative to send your nasty disagreements or disagreements in general, even if not nasty. People say, why do we write about all these things and talk about these things? It's because what we do, no really level of pushback that we get at this point for as long as we've done this show is probably going to change the complexion of what we do overall. We are going to say things, not only us, but the Mike Florios and Stephen A. Smiths and the Colin Cowards of the world. You're not going to agree with 100% of things that come out of those people's mouths. The way that hopefully our show survives is at least a percentage of it becomes must consume type analysis and discussion. If it's not, this show will eventually dwindle down to tens of listeners overall. So, you're going to get analysis out of people that you don't agree with. There's nothing wrong with that overall. So it's just what flavor that you like and who earns your trust, and we're still going to write about the things that we feel that we should write about, of who said what. And we're still going to talk about the things that we think need to be talked about and give our opinions on them. So, I mean, that's the beauty of what makes the sports world go around, right?
Yeah, no, I get that. And I understand the reader's point about trying to give some faith in Tomlin, and I'm very curious to see what he has to say. And I'll wait to hear his take on the Sutton signing and how they came to feel that was the right decision. So I'm just saying my piece. I'm telling you how I feel. I've talked about the football aspect as well. I've written about the football aspect, about how he'll help this team as a slot corner and some of the sub-package versatility and the benefits that brings. But I just don't, I'd be remiss to not mention the off-field stuff and his comments on Wednesday and how I took them. And that's just my opinion.
Joe Green, the Steel Pastor, writes in, great job. Love the show on the site. Thought and maybe a question about Cam Hayward. He says maybe he came in to show publicly that he is fully recovered from the injuries and surgeries. After the season ends, the team has very little contact with the players per union agreement. He writes, my guess is that Cam's agent and Steelers brass suggested that it would help if Cam was on hand. There have been times in the past where the team was surprised when camp finally began and a player was physically unable to perform. He says an example would be David DeCastro. He says, if I remember correctly, apparently there were some that were calling for a restructuring of his contract. They ended up terminating his deal. Do you think the Steelers were just looking for some verification of his progress? In other words, every agent says their guy is in perfect health. Every player does the same. It's a good talking point overall. I envision. I don't know for sure if the Steelers said, "Hey, you know what? We'd like to see you run around some bags," to see how that groin offseason, groin surgery and all went. Could that potentially been the case? I suppose, but I mean, how much are they really asking them to do? Probably at OTAs and mandatory minicamp and all like that. I personally would like to think this was more of a decision by Cam Hayward of saying, I think I made my point in the first 2 weeks here of OTAs, and I think it's in my best interest as a team leader to get back around my guys for the final week of OTAs and then see where talks go from there. That's just my personal take on it. Could it very well be part of or all of some of the picture or idea that maybe Steel Pastor has? I'm not going to discount it. I understand where he's coming from there, but my take is that it's less about the Steelers wanting to see where Cam Hayward is as it was Cam Hayward just thinking it's time to get back.
I'm basically with you. I think Steel Pastor made a good point because the cash show that happened around OTAs, right? He had come in and the team realized this guy is not healthy at all. And I think it caught them by surprise and they had to scramble some and cut the Castro and they signed Trey Turner and just trying to piece that right guard spot together, in the summer essentially. But, Hayward could have just showed up for minicamp next week and shown the team he was healthy and running around and looking fine. So the question was just kind of why skip the first 2 weeks of the voluntary OTAs and then return for the third week when you could have skipped all of OTAs and then been there for mandatory minicamp, avoided potential fines, although I don't think Pittsburgh would have fined Hayward anyway, and then shown your health then just a week later. That was just kind of the curiosity of the inconsistency of it. But I think to your point, Dave, we talked about this Wednesday, was the olive branch of I made my point, I made it clear. And also, once I return to camp, I get to again push for that contract once and make that a story again, which I don't think was his primary motivation, but also probably doesn't hurt to remind people of that story yet again.
All right. Yahoo has one here for us. Writes, Courtland Sutton would be better for the 2024 team, but seems expensive moving forward, and team would lose a pick if they traded for him. How do you think Khan is balancing holding off on a wide receiver trade this offseason, knowing that they don't have an optimal wide receiver group, thinking that for 2025 and beyond building, they should just hold off? There's a lot of assumptions in there, just because maybe a lot of us think the wide receiver room could need some help. Maybe they're totally fine. And then how do we know? He writes in there, how do you think Khan is balancing holding off on a wide receiver trade this offseason? Do we know that? Do we know he's purposely holding off, or do we, there's reports out there that, look, you just roll back to this team opening up the cap space that they opened up ahead of the draft. They were looking into something. They were prepared for something.
Yeah, and then we didn't even really talk about it. Remember, and this is a vague comment, but Michael Lombardi a week ago said that he had heard talks that Pittsburgh thought a deal was done with San Francisco for one of their two receivers. We don't know which, Ayuk or Samuel. Let's talk about that report briefly. What did you make of that comment from Lombardi when he made it? Did it sound true? I know we're all guessing.
I don't know to what depth of trueness there is in that, but I do believe the fact that the Steelers were. Look, I go back to the restructuring of the Alex Highsmith contract, just the timing of it in general there. Did I expect Alex Highsmith to have his contract restructure at some point during the offseason? Yes. Did I expect that restructure to come days right before the draft? No. And when you look at what the cap space the team had at the time and what they had after the restructuring, it makes you really think that they were looking for something to they wanted to be prepared for something to happen, and possibly something that they had previous talks about.
It tracks, at least with that reporting, although Lombardi doesn't say exactly what talks mean. I was not aware of any media reports that said that. I don't know if he had heard from some inside sources. If you had to guess, I know we're all guessing, it's all spilt milk, but what receiver do you think it would have been? Let's assume that report is true and they thought a deal was done with one of those two receivers, Ayuk or Samuel. Which one do you think it was?
At this point now in the game, I kind of wonder if it might have been for Debo.
I think it would have been. If you take Hushmanzada, what he just said, that Ayuk thought about 6 weeks ago that a deal was done with San Francisco, that would have put you right around draft time. So maybe the Niners thought was you sign Ayuk and then flip Samuel right before the draft, get a pick back, and maybe draft somebody, or you have some capital. And obviously they took Pearsall in the first round. So if we assume that's true, and who knows, I think it would have been for Debo Samuel, actually.
I do at this point now, probably closer to the draft. I maybe would have thought
Ayuk.
There just goes to show you how more info can potentially change your realm of thinking when it comes to stuff like that. So I guess the biggest pushback I would give to Yahoo here would be how the balancing holding off on a wide receiver trade. I don't know if we can. I don't know if we know that statement is true.
Yeah, we don't. And I would also just say, I don't know if it's Con holding off so much as you showed in the research, June is not the time for trades. June is the time for evaluation. You look at your guys, and then the deadline spur action, as Andrew Brandt always says. And so when it comes to contract times, closer to the start of training camp, you start to really nail down, okay, are we getting deals done with these guys or not? Obviously, they could happen post-camp, but you start kind of picking up some traction. In June, typically, things are quiet until more late July and August.
All right. I think we got through the emails there. And anything else? Anything late breaking coming in?
I can check here. I'm not seeing anything, but I'm sure something will happen. Probably Frazier, like you said, gets signed about 8 seconds after we finish the podcast. Are you going to watch the Jake Paul-Mike Tyson fight that got rescheduled to November 15th?
No, I'm not going. I don't think I'm going to buy it, but I hope Tyson beats the pulp out of him.
You're not I should take it. You're not a Jake Paul fan.
Nah.
Were you a Tyson guy growing up? Are you indifferent? I know he was kind of divisive.
I will tell you this, back when that was a thing and he was a champion and all like that, and you'd have to pay per view the fights and all like that. I wasn't in a financial situation where I could personally buy them, but I made sure I was at parties or get-togethers where the fight was purchased.
Okay.
I never missed them, so to speak. So I will tell you this. I think Mike Tyson has become a lot more likable and a guy that you root for more so after his boxing career was over than during his boxing career.
Sure. Yeah. Very controversial back then. Do you have a favorite boxer of all time? Are you that much into the sport, or just kind of more general?
I think by kind of osmosis, we always on Wide World of Sports and all like that. We, Sugar Ray Leonard, when he fought, we always had those fights on, and I can remember that. Obviously watched a lot of, Muhammad Ali, those fights growing up on Wide World of Sports. But I think kind of as a kid, the two names that you really knew as a kid, when it came to boxers, were Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Leonard.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not obviously a big boxing guy. I know Pittsburgh has a pretty rich history. I think George Foreman, interesting story. Listened to an interview with one of his kids recently. I think that's just his transition into being a businessman. I think it was also pretty fascinating. I
mean, boxing even way back then was thought as you kind of wondered how dirty it was. how much money controlled it. And even to this day, it's probably not surprising that the MMA stuff has overtaken boxing. You hardly about traditional bouts nowadays. You don't. It's just really not must see TV, right, or these days, and MMA is I think easily taking it over. I couldn't even tell you who the champs are or anything along those lines when it comes to traditional boxing and all nowadays. Whereas obviously years ago, like I said, you followed the Muhammad Ali's and the Larry Holmes and as you mentioned, George Foreman's and Sugar Ray's and Ray Boom Boom Mancini and Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and you could rattle off even as a kid all those names.
Right. Today it's been a lot of celebrities. It probably kills you that some kid is out there. My favorite boxer is Jake Paul. That probably hurts a little bit compared to where boxing once was. Are you going to buy GameStop stock? Are you doing that? I'm just scrolling through Twitter and what's on my timeline right now.
No, my new hot button is I'm getting into trying to research gold coins and silver coins now. So that's my new hot button right now.
You're in a good place to buy some out there in Vegas. So we'll come back on Monday. We'll see if Dave has any shiny new coins, and we'll go from there.
All right. In the meantime, you can voice your opinions at theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter /X at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. Once again, obviously, let's see. You can, if you want to donate to the site, SteelersDepot.com, hit the donate button. If you want an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com, hit the ad-free button. Hopefully next week we'll have more Steelers topical related football stuff to talk about. But until Monday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.